It was close to midnight when the house fell quiet. The only sound was the slow ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the fridge. The homeowner sat alone in the living room, staring at the dark window. Something didn't feel right. And then, movement. A shadow slid across the glass. At first it looked like a trick of the streetlight, but then a faint beam of light cut across the yard. Someone was out there. The homeowner leaned forward, heart racing. Through the blinds, a figure appeared. A person creeping along the driveway, holding a flashlight and a clipboard. The light flickered over the mailbox, the lawn, even the cracks in the sidewalk. Then came the sharp click of a camera. The intruder raised their phone, snapping picture after picture, like they were collecting evidence for a crime scene. It wasn't a thief. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone from the HOA. The homeowner froze, gripping the armrest of the chair. This wasn't the first time. For weeks now, strange letters had been showing up in the mailbox. White envelopes stamped with the HOA's logo. Inside, warnings written in bold red letters. Violation notice. Immediate action required. Final warning. The first letter was about the mailbox being the wrong shade of beige. The next was about the trash can being left out for 5 extra minutes. Then came more. Grass length, porch light brightness, even the color of the garden flowers. Each one was colder and sharper than the last, as if someone was determined to find fault in everything. The homeowner held one of the letters now, the paper trembling in their hand. Outside, the sound of crickets carried on, but every chirp felt louder, sharper, as if the night itself was mocking their fear. Across the street, a porch light flicked on. A neighbor peeked through their curtains, then quickly pulled back. Whispers had already started in the neighborhood. People were talking. Some looked away when the homeowner passed by. Others shook their heads with quiet pity. Everyone knew the HOA was watching. But why? The homeowner sat frozen in the dim light of the living room, feeling both trapped and targeted. The rules didn't make sense. The warnings didn't stop. And the presence of that shadow outside proved one thing. This wasn't about community standards anymore. This was personal. Every night now felt like a game of survival. Every morning brought the dread of opening the mailbox. And somewhere deep down, the homeowner knew the HOA wouldn't stop until they broke them completely. But what they didn't know was that the story wasn't going to end that way. Because while the HOA thought they held all the power, the homeowner was about to turn the tables, and when the time came, the very people who tried to ruin their life would hear the sound of their laughter echoing back. The war had only just begun. The morning sun pushed through the blinds, but the homeowner felt no warmth. Last night's memory of the shadow outside still lingered. With heavy steps, they walked to the mailbox. Inside was a single white envelope stamped with the HOA logo. The words on the page read, "Violation notice. Mailbox color non-compliant." Apparently the beige paint on the mailbox was not an approved shade. Attached was a list of correct colors, all nearly identical. The homeowner chuckled at the absurdity. Who could possibly care about something so small? Tossing the notice onto the counter, they tried to forget it, but forgetting wasn't an option. Days later, another envelope appeared. This time, it claimed the flower bed was too messy. The bright flowers that had always been a source of pride were now considered an eyesore. The letter demanded trimming to proper standards. The homeowner sighed, shaking their head. 2 letters in 2 weeks. Strange, but maybe just bad luck. Then came more. The grass was a 1/4 inch too long. The porch light was too bright. The trash bin was out 7 minutes too late. Each letter felt colder, sharper, more hostile. What once seemed laughable now felt like an attack. The pile of notices on the kitchen counter grew taller, a daily reminder that someone was watching, hunting for the smallest mistake. Neighbors noticed too. Some avoided eye contact, others whispered as they passed. The homeowner could feel the weight of judgment pressing in from all sides. Standing in their yard one evening, they looked around. The grass was cut, the flowers neat, the driveway clean. Everything was in order, yet the letters kept coming. This wasn't about rules, it was about control. And as the last rays of sunlight faded, one truth became clear: the HOA had chosen them as a target. The laughter was gone now. In its place was a growing fire. The fight was only beginning. The notices alone were bad enough, but soon the homeowner realized the letters were only the beginning. One afternoon, as they stepped outside to water the flowers, they froze. A man stood at the edge of the yard, camera in hand, snapping pictures of the porch. When the homeowner asked what he was doing, the man simply said, "Board business," and walked away without another word. The next day, another board member appeared, bending down to measure the height of the grass with a ruler. 2 days later, someone else walked around the property, writing notes on a clipboard as if preparing a full report. None of them asked permission. None of them cared that this was private property. At first, the homeowner tried to ignore it, but the visits grew more frequent. Every time they looked out the window, it felt like someone was there, watching, recording, waiting for a mistake. Then came the whispers. Neighbors began to talk in hushed voices whenever the homeowner passed by. Words like troublemaker and rule breaker floated through the air. Some neighbors even crossed the street to avoid them. It wasn't long before the homeowner heard that the board had been speaking directly to residents, warning them about problems with the property. The homeowner's cheeks burned with embarrassment. They had always taken pride in their home, always kept it neat and welcoming. Now, that pride was being turned into shame. Each trip to the mailbox felt like walking into a spotlight. Each wave from a neighbor felt hollow, forced. The air in the neighborhood had changed. It was heavier, colder, charged with quiet judgment. Inside the house, the stack of violation letters grew taller. On the counter, on the fridge, on the desk. They were everywhere, like an infection spreading through the home. Even when the homeowner tried to relax, the letters were there, whispering reminders of the HOA's power. Nights became restless. The memory of shadows and flashlights outside still haunted them. Every creak of the house made their heart race, as if another board member was lurking in the dark, ready to strike. The pressure was suffocating. And yet, through the fear and frustration, something else was stirring. A thought. A quiet question that would not go away. Why are they doing this? The rules were just an excuse. The constant spying, the rumors, the warnings. This was more than rule enforcement. This was a campaign, deliberate and cruel. The HOA wasn't just nitpicking. They were trying to break the homeowner down. And as that truth sank in, the homeowner felt the first spark of resolve. They had been chosen as the target. But targets don't always stay silent. The board wanted them embarrassed, cornered, and weak. Instead, they were about to find out just how strong their target could be. The pressure had built for weeks. The endless photos, the whispers, the warning letters, each one chipped away at the homeowner's peace, but nothing compared to the envelope that arrived on a stormy Thursday evening. This one was thicker than the rest. Inside was a letter stamped with red ink across the top. Final notice. The words cut deep. Failure to correct all violations within 10 days will result in heavy daily fines, legal action, and possible liens against the property. The homeowner's hands shook as they read the letter again. The list of so-called violations filled an entire page. Mailbox color, flower bed shape, lawn height, porch light wattage, even the placement of the garden hose. It was ridiculous, absurd, impossible to fix in such little time. But what struck hardest was the tone. This wasn't about community rules. This was a threat. The homeowner sat down, staring at the letter in silence. Their mind replayed every moment, every board member creeping around with a camera, every neighbor whispering behind fences. It all made sense now. This wasn't random. This wasn't fair. This was personal. And at the center of it all was the HOA president. The homeowner had seen the smirk on his face during meetings. They remembered the sharp tone, the way he singled them out whenever rules were discussed. Now, with this final letter, the truth was undeniable. He had a grudge. For reasons still unclear, the president had decided this homeowner would be his target. The realization hit like a weight, but it didn't crush them. Instead, it lit a fire. Fear turned to anger. Anger turned to resolve. The HOA president wanted control. He wanted to scare, humiliate, and break them down. But he had made one mistake. He pushed too far. And now the homeowner knew they had to act. For the first time, the thought of fighting back didn't feel impossible. It felt necessary. That night, the homeowner sat at their desk, staring at the pile of violation letters spread across the surface. What once looked like random attacks now looked like evidence. Each letter, each photo, each threat, they weren't just annoyances anymore. They were proof. Proof of harassment. Proof of abuse of power. Proof of something much bigger than petty rules. The storm outside rattled the windows, lightning flashing across the dark sky. But inside, the homeowner felt a calm determination settle in. The battle with the HOA was no longer about flower beds or trash bins. It was about standing up against someone who thought they could control everyone. The president believed he had all the power, but soon he would see what happens when the target fights back. The turning point had arrived. The final notice had changed everything. The homeowner knew they couldn't sit back anymore. If the HOA wanted a fight, they would get one, but this time on different terms. Instead of reacting in anger, the homeowner decided to watch, listen, and learn. The first step was the next HOA meeting. They walked in quietly, sitting in the back row where no one paid much attention. The board president sat at the front, gavel in hand, speaking with the same smug authority he always carried. His voice echoed through the small room as he lectured about order and rules. The homeowner didn't argue. They didn't even raise their hand. Instead, they opened a small notebook and started writing. Every expense, every motion, every casual remark, it all went into that notebook. And soon, patterns began to appear. The HOA talked about repairs that were too expensive, yet somehow funds had been approved for new furniture in the clubhouse. They claimed money was low, yet board members approved landscaping work on their own homes, paid for by community funds. The more the homeowner listened, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about them. The board was using the HOA like a personal bank account. But the corruption didn't stop with money. Quietly, the homeowner began talking to neighbors. Some were cautious, afraid of retaliation. Others, however, opened up with relief, sharing stories that sounded all too familiar. One neighbor had been fined for leaving a bicycle on their porch, another for planting the wrong kind of tree. A single mother down the street had been threatened with legal action over a small playset in her backyard. Each story carried the same theme. Small, harmless things turned into weapons by the board. And behind it all, the same person pulling the strings, the president. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. This wasn't about keeping the neighborhood clean or orderly. It was about power. The president ruled through fear, targeting anyone he didn't like, while rewarding his allies with silence and protection. The homeowners' anger grew, but so did their focus. Every letter they had received, every whisper of gossip, every shadow on their lawn, it all had a purpose now. The notebook filled with dates, details, names and numbers. Each page felt like another weapon added to their arsenal. They had walked into the meeting as a victim, but they walked out as something else entirely. An investigator, ready to turn the board's own tricks against them. The HOA thought they were dealing with someone weak, someone easy to push around. But now, the homeowner had knowledge, and knowledge was power. The board's secrets were no longer safe, and soon the truth would come crashing down on them. The notebook was no longer just notes. It was a weapon, and the homeowner knew it wasn't enough to keep it hidden. They needed a plan. Lashing out would only play into the HOA's hands. The board wanted them to explode, to make mistakes, to look like the villain. Instead, the homeowner chose patience. The first step was proof. Every letter, every violation, every photo the board had taken was carefully stored in folders. Copies were made and kept in safe places. Meeting notes were organized, highlighting the strange spending patterns and favoritism. The homeowner even started recording audio from public meetings, careful to capture the president's words exactly. Next came the neighbors. One by one, the homeowner began to reach out, not in anger, but in quiet conversations. A kind word at the mailbox, a short chat at the park. Slowly, carefully, trust was built. To their surprise, frustration was everywhere. People were tired of living under constant fear. Parents worried about their kids' toys being violations. Retired couples complained about endless fines over harmless details. Many had stories that matched the homeowners, and each story added weight to the growing case. Soon the homeowner wasn't standing alone. A small circle of neighbors formed, each sharing evidence, each offering support. The fear that once kept them silent was slowly turning into courage. The homeowner kept their focus sharp. They didn't rant. They didn't threaten. Instead, they listened, documented, and planned. The question wasn't if they could expose the truth. It was when. The suspense grew with every passing day. The president strutted around the neighborhood as if untouchable, unaware that the very people he had tried to silence were gathering in secret. Every smug word he spoke at a meeting, every warning letter he signed, it was all being collected, all feeding into the plan. The homeowner felt the weight of risk. If they failed, the board would come down harder than ever. The fines, the threats, the isolation. It could get worse. But if they succeeded, the entire neighborhood would finally see the truth. The plan was set. The evidence was ready. The allies were waiting. The president had turned this into a game of power. But soon the board would discover they weren't the only ones who knew how to play. The stage for payback was almost ready, and the homeowner was prepared to make their move. The night of the meeting arrived. The small community hall buzzed with the usual chatter, but there was tension in the air. Homeowners filled the folding chairs, papers in their hands, complaints on their lips. At the front sat the HOA board, lined up behind a long table like judges at a trial. And at the center sat the president, smug as always, tapping the gavel for silence. "Order," he said. "Let's begin." The meeting went on in its usual rhythm. Discussions of landscaping, pool repairs, parking complaints. The president spoke with his usual air of control, as if nothing could touch him. But then the homeowner stood. The room quieted. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. The homeowner held a thick folder in one hand and a notebook in the other. Their voice was calm, steady, but carried enough weight to make the room lean forward. "I've been keeping records," they began. Gasps rippled through the audience as the homeowner laid out the first stack of papers. Violation notices, dozens of them, all aimed at their property for the smallest and most ridiculous reasons. Then came photos. Board members sneaking around yards, flashlights cutting through the night. Whispers grew louder. The president cleared his throat, trying to interrupt, but the homeowner kept going. Next came the financial records. Copies of expense sheets, highlighted lines showing money spent on things that had nothing to do with the community, new furniture for the clubhouse, landscaping on board members' homes, personal reimbursements labeled as maintenance. The crowd stirred. People leaned in, murmuring, shaking their heads in disbelief. And then the final blow. Emails. Printed copies of messages between board members, mocking certain residents and plotting fines to teach them a lesson. The president's face drained of color. He shifted in his chair, fumbling with his papers. "Is our private matters," he tried to say, but the words fell flat, because at that moment, voices rose from the crowd. Neighbors who had stayed quiet for years finally spoke up. One stood and shared their own story of unfair fines. Another described threats they had received. A third waved a stack of letters nearly as tall as the homeowners. The room erupted. The board members stammered, scrambling to defend themselves, but the noise of angry residents drowned them out. The balance of power shifted in an instant. The board no longer held the room. The people did. And standing in the middle of it all was the homeowner, calm and unshaken, their evidence spread across the table like a final verdict. The truth was out. And the board's empire of fear was collapsing. The meeting ended in chaos. The president's gavel struck the table again and again, but no one listened. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now shouted their anger, their frustration pouring out after years of fear. By the following week, the pressure became too much. The board members, cornered by evidence and surrounded by angry residents, had no choice. One by one, they resigned. The president fought the longest, but even he couldn't survive the storm. His power had vanished the moment the truth was revealed. In his place, new leaders were voted in, neighbors who cared more about fairness than control. Rules didn't disappear, but the constant harassment did. For the first time in years, people felt free to plant flowers, hang decorations, and live without looking over their shoulders. The neighborhood was alive again. As for the homeowner, they no longer felt the heavy knot of dread each time they walked to the mailbox. No more letters, no more shadows in the night. Instead, they were greeted with smiles, nods, and even thanks from neighbors who knew the truth, that it was their courage that brought change. One afternoon, the homeowner stood at the edge of their yard, looking at the same mailbox that had sparked the first violation. It was still painted the same wrong shade of beige, and now no one cared. Children's laughter echoed down the street. A neighbor waved warmly. The air felt lighter, freer, as if the whole community had shed a weight it had carried for far too long. The homeowner smiled, a deep, satisfied smile. The people who tried to ruin their life had been defeated. The whispers had turned into cheers, and the fear had turned into freedom. They walked back to their porch, calm and proud, their voice soft but steady, as they said the words that would echo in their mind forever. "They tried to ruin my life, but in the end I had the last lay." And with that, the story of fear, control, and corruption came to an end, not with silence, but with victory.